Recording in progress.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Just a quick reminder to please be on mute as we go through the presentation today. That limits any kind of audio interference. But we are here to walk through the monitoring application. We revised 4 applications for the open solicitation offering, and we're really happy to be in a place where we can share with you what those revisions look like. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes and just kind of provide you some overview and some context as to why we changed the application, what exactly we changed, how we went about this, and then what offerings it's applicable to. We will spend most of the time in the online application within the monitoring specific application, and Ken is going to walk you through all those changes. Reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be checking the chat periodically and answering your questions along the way. Anything I missed here, Liz?
Nope, you covered it.
Okay, super. So a little bit about why we changed our applications. We have been hearing for quite some time that our applications are long. It takes people a long time to fill out our applications. Some of the questions are redundant, repetitive. We've heard some issues around clarity with regards to the question content itself and the guidance that goes along with it. And so we're definitely an agency that's always after continuous improvement. So we've heard from our applicants, we've heard from our review team members, and so we had an opportunity to address those concerns. And so here we are. We've made some pretty big changes to our applications, and as you'll see in a little bit, we're not quite done, but we're at a good place, and we're pretty excited to share what we've done. Another component is that we are no longer collecting metrics at the time of application. So these are questions that were, if you had an anadromous fish project that helped you identify the different ESUs and different recovery plans, it was very metric driven. And so just removing those questions alone out of the application almost cut the application in half. So if you do have an anadromous fish focus project, there is a potential that you'll have to report metrics to OWEB, and they will do so once the grant is awarded by our board. So the metrics database is actually being developed as we speak today, and it'll be ready in the fall. So more to come on that, but really, really happy to be in a place where we are today. Anything that I missed, Liz?
Nope.
Okay. So how did we do it? Well, there was a group of us at OWEB, and we also had a review team member to provide that perspective. And we spent the majority of 2023 getting together and walking through the application. We would print out the templates that would include all the guidance, all the questions. We would have our evaluation criteria, which is up here in the left. We would have the Oregon Administrative Rule, which is up here in the right. And we would look at every question and every piece of guidance and crosswalk each of those and say, does this question still make sense? Can it be worded in a clearer way? Can the guidance be more reflective of what our evaluation criteria is asking? It was really our opportunity to take a look at the questions and vet out their relevance and how can we make it clear, more clear on what we want to actually see as a response. And this piece was pretty important because, we went through some of the applications and decided this question is not referenced in rule. This question is not referenced in our guidance. Let's get rid of it. We don't need it. So it was kind of fun to be able to, to kind of take a crack at these applications. OWEB initially launched these applications online in 2016. And, we've done some minor revisions here and there, but we've never taken a really complete look at the application and did some major revisions. So this is kind of our first take at this. And so after the team did the application revisions, we had a significant amount of testing internal. I'd probably say about half the agency tested the application internally. And then we had about a dozen folks externally that also tests the application. And we got some great feedback right off the bat. And we were able to incorporate some of that feedback just from hearing from internal and external testers. So yeah, pretty excited. Anything else I need to cover here, Liz?
You covered it all.
Okay. So this next slide is really just a reminder about the use of our Measure 76 funds. So these are lottery funds that OWEB is statutory allowed to spend. And so there are specific requirements that come along with those funds. And so this is just a reminder that our grant funds have to be focusing on projects that have a direct fish and wildlife habitat benefit and/or water quality benefit. So when you're thinking about a TA application, engagement application, monitoring application, even a restoration application, those applications have to make a direct link to the specific requirements that are allowing us to spend these funds. And so on the left-hand side of your screen, these are what we're allowed to use our funds on. So this is really just a reminder that this is what we are required to spend our money on. And so the applications have to make that clear and direct line to native fish, wildlife, and/or water quality. Anything here to cover, Liz?
No, you got it.
Okay. So let's get down to the fun part. What changed and what didn't? The what changed part, so we completely changed proposed problem statement section, the proposed solution section, and wrap-up section. So this is, I would consider to kind of be the core of the application. This is where in each application, these sections vary pretty greatly depending upon the application type. So these are the places where we were able to make the changes that we were hoping for. But I also want to recognize that there are some sections in the application that we did not change. So we did not change the administrative section. This is the section that asks you for permits, insurance, who's going to be the project manager and the fiscal operator. We didn't change the budget page. We didn't change the funding and match page. But I'll say that we really want to change these sections. We just didn't have the time to do it now. These three sections, administrative, budget, and funding and match, they touch each application that OWEB puts out the door. So it has a very big reach. And the budget and funding match page especially has a lot of coding and IT work behind the scenes. So it's just going to be a much bigger lift to make those changes. So it's on our radar. We want to change them. We're going to change them, but we didn't change them yet. What we did change was problem statement, proposed solutions, and the wrap up. Anything that I missed here, Liz?
Nope, you covered everything.
Okay. So which offering are these new applications applicable to? So right now, they're only applicable to the open solicitation grant offering. So that's the only grant offering that you will be able to use these revised applications. It's likely that more offerings will utilize these revised applications come this fall. And so that's the time when that metrics database I talked a little bit about will be complete. So if you're working in, say, the Focus Investment Program or other programs within OWEB, you're still going to use the other application versions. So right now, it's only specific to the open solicitation offering. And we just really kind of want to make sure that you all, had clarity on what it does and what it does not apply to. Anything to cover here, Liz?
Nope.
Okay. I think without further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our special guest, Ken. And Ken is going to walk us through the application. So just a reminder that if you have questions, type them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as Ken's going through the application. When Ken is done going through the application, I have a couple wrap-up slides just to kind of close us today. And so, Ken, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Cool.
So you can share your screen, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Greg and Liz. You guys see that okay?
Got it.
Sweet. So Yeah, so I will be pausing kind of at certain points. So if you guys do have questions, as Greg said, please type them into the chat or raise your hand or, figure out how to get our attention. I think that'll be helpful as we go. These online applications, we put a ton of time and effort, you guys, into the guidance. Those are those lowercase I buttons. There also can be access in the templates. And so I'll be clicking on those, kind of emphasizing the guidance, but also providing some additional tips and tricks or emphasizing certain things to include in your responses to each question. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to call out a few things before we dive in. This is what you kind of see after the screen. You'll see after you create an application and put your name for your application name. This is just a name I put in for this webinar today for the new version. But one of the things that you can access, that's a great resource, are the templates. And the templates are important. They're Word documents that have all the questions and guidance, so you can work on those, especially if you're collaborating with partners outside your organization, to include their responses, and then you can copy and paste that into the online application. And so just as we were talking, as Greg was mentioning, there is the original application for monitoring, and then there's this version 2, which is the new one. That's one that you'll be using in Open Solicitation. And so just want to make sure that if you are interested in downloading the template to help prepare your responses, make sure you're using the version 2, and that also applies to restoration and technical assistance. You would, hit generate and then download it, and then you would have that available to you. And I just wanted to, this is what it looks like. We're going to be focusing on problem statement, proposed solution, and wrap up today. And so the first question and problem statement is in regular font, right? And then the guidance, the same guidance that's in the I buttons in the online app, are in italic font. And so that's really important to include if you're sending the template to your partners. Say some folks are collaborating, you want a few people to provide responses to some of the questions. Make sure they have the guidance too, because if they're not working on the online app, they're not going to be clicking on the I button. And again, if you're collaborating with some folks who are giving you some responses to some of the questions, really look at their responses and make sure it's hitting the guidance. And if not, ask them to, revise it before you upload it into the online application. Another thing that's really important is the feedback button, you guys. We've made a lot of changes to this application, and there's a lot of people using it right now in the system. There still can be bugs. We believe that we've worked them all out, but sometimes these electronic systems do weird things, and so if something's buggy, something's not behaving like it should, it's really important for you to put that in here, type it in, and hit submit comment and upload that. We have staff that get this feedback emailed to them real time, and so they are constantly checking on it. And also, though, if you have suggestions for additional functionality or improvements, or something's missing that is odd, please include that as well. So feedback's super important. Please use it. We look at it. There's an internal staff that actually looks at it monthly, but there's also someone that looks at it daily in case there's stuff we have to fix immediately. So another thing that, because there have been so many changes to the applications, we do not want you to use the clone feature. So there may be long-term OWEB applicants. There's a clone feature, basically just copies and pass your copies the responses from a past application into a new one. And because there's been so many changes to the questions, the order, and just the number of questions and where they are, the clone feature will not function correctly. That said, if you plan to resubmit something or pursue funding for an ongoing monitoring project, you can still copy and paste. So you would print that to PDF, an old application that you've submitted, you can print out the PDF and then copy, say like, sort of the problem statement is still the same, or some of your monitoring methods are still the same. You can still copy and paste that into the new field. Just really want to emphasize that. Another thing before I dive in here, I want to emphasize is that OWEB encourages monitoring applicants to schedule a pre-app consultation with myself and the RPR in your area. And so Liz or Greg is going to put in the chat my email address in case you don't have it, and then also what we call the RPR regional map. And so OWEB divides Oregon into 6 regions. There's an RPR regional program rep for each region. So if you're interested in a specific geographic area and you're not sure who your RPR is, you can click on that link, look where you're situated, where your watershed is located, and then you can see who the RPR is, email RPR and I that you'd like to schedule a pre-app consultation, and we'll provide some of our availability and schedule a meeting, a virtual meeting. And those are just really helpful it helps us kind of understand who's interested and who might be coming in, learn more about you and your project, and then also helps you get some advice from us, make sure your project's eligible for our funding opportunity, and hopefully help you submit a competitive application. They're not required, they're just strongly encouraged, so don't feel like you have to do that, but we think it's a service that's helpful for both you and us. So one of the things that I just want to mention when we do these pre-app consultations and when we've done these webinars in the past, one thing I want to really emphasize that I think is helpful, the template can be useful for this, is before you start writing your responses, really look at the whole universe of questions, look at all the questions and look at the flow, and you start to map out how you're going to pitch your project and make some notes to yourself, because we've given really careful thought to the specific questions we're asking and the order in which we're asking them. We feel like that flow, if you will, is necessary to help you propose your project, but also to meter out the information to allow the reviewer to review your project and apply the evaluation criteria. And so if you find yourself in saying the same thing over and over, you're probably doing something wrong, okay? And really want you to, that's like a sign, like, hey, I should really be thinking about, I'm writing the same thing over and over, like, that's like a red flag or something that should make you pause and really think about what you're writing. And so don't provide all your information for your entire project in the first 2 questions, and then you feel like you covered it, and then just get really short on your responses as you go because you feel like you already covered that. The reviewers are kind of trained to look for your responses in the appropriate questions. These are dense applications that review multiple applications, and so providing the information in the correct question makes it easier for us to review it, but also for you to propose it. So just some of those opening remarks I would like to make before I go to the problem statement. So again, this is sort of that menu, if you will: admin, budget, funding, and match, upload, and permit page have not been changed. So I'll be focusing my time today with you guys on problem statement, proposed solution, and wrap up. So let's go ahead and get started. So really the first question that we ask you hasn't changed. But the big thing that changed is the character limit. This used to be an 8,000 character limit. So we've almost cut it in half. And so you're gonna want to be really, clear and concise, really helping to understand, what are the habitat conditions or watershed functions this monitoring will evaluate. So the guidance has been lengthened in those I buttons. We're now including the specific evaluation criteria that your responses will be, evaluated by. So those are, you always see kind of one or multiple evaluation criteria, and then potentially one or multiple examples today. I won't have time to read all of these, but I just kind of wanted to give you the familiarity. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here. Some of the guidance is shorter, some of it's longer, but staff has put a lot of effort into providing guidance to help you create your response. So the most important thing here is, this is not the time for you. I know you're excited, but don't describe your monitoring project right now, okay? We want you to describe the situation, the specific problem, or watershed limiting factors, including climate change impacts. And if you're doing sort of, if it's important to the context of your projects, please include a discussion of the restoration and monitoring history to provide context for the project. And again, really, that's meant to be clear and concise. We don't want you to necessarily talk about all the problems that have occurred in your watershed. In general, the reviewers are familiar with, say, the hydroelectric dams on the Columbia system in the Willamette Basin. You don't need to go back into the overgrazing by sheep in the 1850s. Like, keep it a little bit more relevant and specific to your watershed and the sites that you'll be monitoring. This next question is new. So why is this monitoring project needed at this time? And so helping to emphasize this, there's two criteria that apply. And so some of the guidance here is, what key information will be produced and what led you to propose this monitoring? Applicants proposing, this is important, applicants that are proposing long-term repeat monitoring should describe why there is an ongoing need for this data. In the past, if you had a continuation, we asked for that information later in the application, but it's been moved up a little bit here. So project history, it's been modified just a bit, but so the first question is, are you requesting funds to continue work on projects previously funded by OWEB? It's a pretty straightforward question. You'll know if that's the case. If yes, please briefly describe what was completed. Again, this character limit has been reduced significantly. What are the key things that you think you want the reviewers to know, or what you've learned? What have you accomplished with previous OWEB dollars? And then provide the applicable OWEB grant numbers. Those are helpful for us. And again, it's a really short character limit there. So just provide the numbers, that's all it's needed. And the only guidance that we have is, if you have multiple grant numbers, is to please separate those with semicolons. And then the next question is this a resubmit? So have you submitted an OWEB application for this project before that was not awarded? Again, you'll know that. If it's yes, please provide the applicable OWEB grant numbers. And that's important because we will then, for the reviewers, upload the past evaluation for the reviewers so they can see what were the strengths and concerns for the previous application. And that helps them kind of understand, well, if it wasn't funded, what were the concerns, and what were those concerns, and how were they addressed? And so we've built in a place for you to do that. So again, if it's a resubmit, please briefly describe how your previous concerns were addressed. And this is a short character limit, and really want you to be sort of high-level summary of how you address concerns from the previous evaluation. So there's an example there. Basically, if there was concerns identified with the budget for lump sum, and you now address those and have broke out in more detail in the budget table, you just describe that as well. So tell us how you address the concern and where the reviewer can see those changes to see how you address those. Again, that's really helpful. Over the years, I've seen projects not be funded the first time around, and then they resubmit and they address those concerns, and then they get recommended for funding the second round. So that's really important to think about if you are resubmitting an application that was not funded in the previous round. And then finally, this plan section. So this kind of is the end of the proposed solution. And so, we're basically asking you what federal, state, or local assessment, basin plan, recovery plan, or watershed action plan helped inform your project selection. And so this links back to the criteria. I really want you to think about, again, it's monitoring, right? So what plans have described this monitoring or information need? And that's usually related to, limiting factors, habitat conditions, watershed processes, or actions identified in really any kind of plans. Can be a plan developed by you, by local organization, by a state agency, by a tribe, by a federal agency. I really just want you to just think about what plans that you want to really highlight that are relevant, applicable, and appropriate. We don't want every plan that may have mentioned your watershed at once. Really just think about which ones make the most sense to the project you're proposing. Just because you list 10 plans doesn't mean it's gonna be more compelling to fund. And also think of the time scale. If you're starting to include a plan, the Oregon plan for salmon and watershed that's over 20 years old, is it really that relevant to this project? So those are some key things to think about when you're filling out that final question in plans. And so I thought I'd just pause here, see if Greg or Liz have anything to add in the problem statement part of the application before I move us on to proposed solution.
Thanks, Ken. I don't have anything to add. I think you did a great job. We do have one question. And the question is, should our response to continuation phased be specific to continuing previous OWEB monitoring projects, or should we include TA and/or restoration work funded by OWEB?
Yeah, just keep it. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what Liz and Greg think, but I would think this is more just around monitoring.
I would agree. Yes.
Yeah. No, thanks. Good question.
Okay, we got to thank you, and I think you're good to move on.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, thanks. So, so the next page, if you will, is proposed solution. You can navigate by clicking this button here, or you kind of have this bookmark over here. So whatever one you want to click on to proceed. So the next section of proposed solution really talks about the monitoring activities. So we made a change here, and I'll talk about that in a second, but really there are 3 different monitoring activities that you can propose to do, and you can really only choose one. And I think that's the key message here. So there's status and trend monitoring, there's effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project or projects, so project scale effectiveness monitoring, and then there's also landscape scale effectiveness monitoring. Sometimes we get the question is my project landscape scale or is it, project scale? And really it's how you think about it. The way I think about landscape scale effectiveness monitoring is just at a larger spatial scale, but also you might be monitoring the impacts of multiple different types of restoration actions, so say like fish passage improvement and habitat enhancement, and that have been implemented over a longer period of time. We used to have an additional monitoring activity that's been removed during the streamlining of the application, and that was we removed rapid bioassessment. And the internal team felt like rapid bioassessment really is just status and trend monitoring. And so if you are going to be proposing rapid bioassessment, please choose status and trend. Still an eligible monitoring activity, just rolled into status and trend. So the next section is goals and actions, and this is definitely looks different than before. This used to be goals, objectives, and activities, but also this is where you used to include your monitoring questions. And so one of the main things here is that the monitoring questions has been moved to the next section under where you propose your study design. So let's get into goal statement. Again, this is a short character limit, you guys. It's in a goal statement is just that. It's a short, it should be 1 or 2 sentences, It really just sets the stage for understanding your project outcomes. And so we provide a few examples there for each activities. So we provide a status and trend, an effectiveness monitoring, and a landscape effectiveness monitoring example to help you kind of better understand what we're looking for. And then now we ask for actions here, right? And so we ask for you to list a specific quantified actions to achieve your goal. This is where we used to ask for SMART objectives, and really we're still asking for the same thing. We're just using a different word because sometimes I think maybe objectives is confusing for people. And so make sure you quantify the actions when you describe these. Since we have dropped our metrics, again, actions are essentially objectives and are a key component to understanding your scope of work. It will help frame the deliverables later when we review your final report. So please be clear, since we will refer to this when reviewing your final report and deliverables based on what you propose to do. And monitoring actions should basically include, three things. Basically, what you plan to do, where it will occur, and when it will occur. So an example there is you're proposing to collect continuous water quality data at 5 locations in the Sandy River Basin for 3 years. These are really short. We don't want you to then justify why your action is so important and why you're doing it. Again, that we'll be asking you information either earlier or after that you should be able to, emphasize why it's important to do that. And then the next thing that we ask, it's really simple, is just what are the actions or steps that you're going to take to implement that action? Okay. So really just kind of describe the steps that you will follow to complete this action. And then you can kind of think of these as bullet items. So what are the key steps that to implement that action? And if you have multiple actions or objectives, you just you hit this plus sign. There's no limit on the number of actions that you can include. And so it's just really how you think about organizing your project. And some people, lump multiple things into one action, and some people list multiple actions. So it's just really how do you want to think about it, organizing your project and how you want to propose it. Let's see here. So the next section is QA/QC. This really hasn't changed, but I just thought I'd emphasize a few things here. So we ask, do you have a quality assurance project plan or sampling analysis plan? And the guidance that we have for you is, projects related to water quality require an EPA or DEQ approved quality assurance project plan, a QAP, or a sampling analysis plan. And that's because water quality data is required to be, that's funded with OWEB dollars, is required to be submitted to DEQ. And in order for them to evaluate the data, for them to decide how they want to store it and use your data to inform their decision making, they need to know how it was collected, and they like to grade your data. And so early on in the life of the project, if you develop a sampling analysis plan with them, then early on you're aware of all the quality assurance, quality control procedures that they require and help you collect high quality data to meet your needs and the state's needs. And then also you'll have an idea of the metadata that you'll need to report along with the data to submit it to DEQ to meet our data reporting requirements. And so there's a little bit more information at a link there on DEQ's website. Again, we're always happy to put you in touch with DEQ staff that work on these if needed. And then projects with no water quality nexus may also require benefit from a QA plan. So if this fits your project, select yes and provide more information below. There's a follow-up question. But basically, the evaluation criteria that the reviewers are using to evaluate the response to this question is, we want to understand if the applicant will be using professionally accepted monitoring and analysis protocols, including QA/QC procedures. So if you say no, you don't have a QA plan, we want you to explain why and how you plan to incorporate QA/QC measures into your monitoring and data management approach and practices. And so the guidance is basically saying, if you are collecting water quality data, please describe your plan to write a SAP with DEQ approval. If you're not collecting water quality data, you still may need one, or you may not need one, excuse me. And most likely you're not. So say you're collecting fish data, or you're gauging streams. DEQ isn't going to review your data, and they don't need you to develop a sampling analysis plan. And so, but you still, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're monitoring, even if it's upland vegetation, you should still be describing your quality assurance and quality control procedures to collect high quality data. So we want you to include a description of how you ensure relevant staff incorporate QA/QC measures for data collection, at the data review phase, data management, analysis, and reporting. So QA/QC should be incorporated throughout your project to collect and report high quality data. Real quick, if you say yes, you do have one, we just want you to brief, provide the name of it and briefly describe the plan that's been developed, what exists, what did you write, and that you'll be following to perform the monitoring. All right. So the next section is the project work plan, which saw some revisions, and some of the things that we asked for in here has replaced 2 narrative questions. So that's good. So this table is important. And so what we say here is for each project action identified above, provide the responsible entity overseeing implementation, their specific role, related qualifications, experience to oversee that action, and when that action will start and end. And so one of the things that, when I was looking at this, that when the internal team put together the evaluation criteria that applies to this table, there's 4 evaluation criteria that apply to this table. So that emphasizes just how important the content that you're putting in here, because there's a ton of criteria that we're applying to this. And so please really think that through. I think the main thing is that, you should, the actions that are earlier in this application, the project work plan, and later on in the budget, these things should all line up. And, that's just super helpful, because you want to make sure that these actions, everything that people are doing and what they're getting paid to do, or the match they're contributing, that you're identifying what they are doing, what their responsibility is. And so, major elements of your project include the study design, data collection, data management, analysis, and reporting. And so, and we understand that maybe you haven't hired staff yet, or a contractor has not yet been hired. And so therefore, if that's the case, you can still, tell us their title, who they're going to work for, or, it's going to contractor, what their role will be, and like the desired qualifications if you have not yet identified who will do that. But it should be still clear what their role is. So with that, I'm going to pause to see if I know Greg likes to say some stuff about the table. I'm not sure if I hit everything that you want to mention there or emphasize.
I think you hit everything, Ken. Nice job. Yeah, I just reiterate the connection from the actions identified above, the work plan, and the budget. When you can make those clear lines, it really tells a clear story on what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and how much it's going to cost. So pretty happy about this table. The only question we got was, we're not really how long is it taking DEQ to approve SAPs? I'm not sure we're in a position to answer that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that is an ongoing topic that we've heard about through some of the other SAPs that are being developed through, like, say, monitoring of strategic implementation areas. We're communicating with DEQ. I think it's something we're aware of and communicating with DEQ. And there's, the main thing is that folks are if you're collecting water quality data, that you're doing your part to start developing your SAP, you're submitting it to DEQ. And then if it takes time for them to provide you comments or approve the final document, I don't think that's going to pause the monitoring or stop the monitoring from happening, but at least you're working on doing your part to try to identify your objectives, your methods, and the QA/QC procedures. I know that sometimes just the finalization of the document is taking time to get all the reviews and signatures, but hopefully DEQ is working with you to provide, the methods, those QA/QC procedures, so you have those before you start to collect your data.
No other questions, Ken. So I think
Okay, cool.
Going.
So the next page to turn, you guys, after you fill out the proposed solution, is effectiveness of a restoration project. That's the monitoring activity I selected, right? But if you're doing status and trend, this little blue box would just say status and trend. Or if you're doing landscape scale effectiveness monitoring, this would say that there. And so you just click the button or, turn the page. It's kind of how I think about it. And so here is the next section, methods and design. So the major change here is that we now ask you to start with your monitoring question and then describe the study design to answer that question. And, the monitoring questions should be linked to the monitoring goal and actions that you proposed earlier in the application. And so really just want to emphasize the importance of, having a clear and answerable monitoring question. Normally, that's how people think about it. It's like, all right, we're trying to figure this out. Like, what are our questions? And then you design your monitoring approach, your study design, you pick your monitoring methods and your data analysis procedures to help answer that question. So that's what we're really trying to identify. And that is how some of our criteria has been set up. And when the Rules Advisory Committee changed our evaluation criteria a few years ago, that was something that they were really focused on, is like, what's their question and how are they going to answer it? So we chose to take that out of the goals and objectives section and move that into the study design. And so we ask you to describe your monitoring question. And one of the things that you might have sort of a group of questions, you can have more than one here. But describe the specific monitoring question or questions this project will answer as it relates to the monitoring goal and actions listed earlier. And then from there, describe the study design used to choose sampling locations, parameters, and frequency to answer this monitoring question or questions. And so if you have so the way I kind of think about it is, if you have a similar group of questions that can be answered with a single set of sites, parameters, and frequency, include all those questions here in monitoring question 1. But if you have a different set of questions that will require you to have a different set of sites or different parameters or a sampling frequency, hit this plus sign to include a second set of questions to include that there. And you can have multiple questions that have sort of different set of sites or sampling parameters and a frequency. So it's really up to you how you think about it, what your questions are, and how you're going to answer those with both your study design, but also your monitoring methods. And so, for each monitoring question, explain why you have chosen the specific monitoring locations, parameters, and the frequency of data collection. And so, we list the criteria here and the example. And so this is under that sort of effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project activity. So some of the things that you would include here is, are you doing like a before or after study design? Are you doing a before after control impact? Or are you doing an extensive post-treatment study design? talk about how you're picking your sampling sites. And this can be at the micro scale, down to where you're going to choose your transects or your sampling plots. Are those randomly generated using a grits type approach, or are you at the macro scale? How are you picking your sampling sites? So keep that in mind. Also, if you're using the use of control or reference sites, talk about how are you going to select those control sites? Are those control sites sort of like impacted? You're going to compare your sort of restored condition to an impacted site, or are those control or reference sites sort of in good condition, sort of represent the restored condition, and you're going to look at your impact of your restoration actions sort of and how those compare to the reference condition. And so those are super important. People want to make sure, reviewers want to make sure, if you're comparing to a control or reference, that they're suitable, that there are a good comparison. And finally, you want to talk about, your parameters. So what parameters, why'd you choose those parameters? What are your sort of metrics that you'll be using to answer that question? And then the frequency. And so frequency is important, if you're doing before and after, or even down to more of the micro scale on, we're choosing to sample turbidity continuously during this season, during, the wet season, if you will, and or if you're going to collect water temperature, but you're just going to do it, in the summer, like why'd you choose that? And so really get into the nuances of picking your sites, picking your parameters, and your sampling frequency related to the monitoring questions, and why those are suitable, or why you chose to select those. So after you talk about your study design for those monitoring questions or question, we ask you to describe the monitoring methods that will be followed and to provide the citation for the protocols that will be used. We ask that you provide sufficient detail of the methods and protocols be provided to demonstrate how the data will be collected for QA/QC, but also demonstrating that you have sort of a thorough understanding of the methods to collect the data. Do not just say, hey, we uploaded, our monitoring methods are going to follow X protocol and we uploaded it to the application, so check it out. Or here's a link and this is what we're going to do. Like, that's not sufficient detail. Yeah, it's great to have the citation or upload, but we really need you to describe your methods, whether they be field-based methods, or if you're using remote sensing methods, those are also be appropriate to describe there as well. Don't get into data analysis. Don't tell us what you're going to do with the data after you collect it. This is really around the methods of how you're going to collect the data. Okay. And again, if you're going to collect existing data, so again, you're going to use, remote imagery, or you're going to pull satellite imagery, talk to us about that. Like, where are you going for that source of information, and things of that nature, and how you, so I think that's really important to kind of emphasize. This is more how you're going to collect the data. You're going to provide a citation, you're going to describe that. You're not going to tell us what you're going to do with the data. That comes later, and I'll show you guys that in the data analysis question. Let's see here. One of the things about uploads, you can upload things, to demonstrate, like, these are our methods or this is our protocol. You can do that, but you really want to just be careful about what you upload, because if it's a 200-page report and your protocol is in the appendix, it's going to be hard to find. And really, the reviewers are tasked with reviewing your application and your response to the questions in the application. And so if you have a lengthy upload, it might be hard to find the information you want us to look at, what you want the reviewer to look at. And so just really be careful with what you upload, how big the upload is, and really have focused uploads. Uploads can be really helpful. For instance, when it's talking about study design, if you have a nice map showing some scales, where your project is located and where your sampling sites are located, and maybe, what different monitoring will occur, that's super helpful for you to visualize your sampling design, your watershed, and where monitoring will occur. And so, so uploads are helpful, but just be really careful about how big they are and what you want us to look at. And the more you can sort of do formatting, you call it figure one, then it makes it easier for reviewers to go in the uploads and find it. So again, if you have multiple questions that require sort of different study design and different methods, you would hit the plus sign and include that information here. So now we're going to go to information and engagement. And again, this information and engagement section is unique to where we're at, right? We're in effectiveness of a restoration project, right? All these questions down here apply to that. Information engagement does have one less question for status and trend, and I'll show that here. But for effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project and landscape scale effectiveness monitoring, they are all the same questions under information engagement. And the first one there that we asked for is for you to describe the restoration project or projects that will be monitored. So however you want to describe that. And if the restoration is funded by OWEB, please list the grant number so we can track that as well. And so it's 4,000 character limit. Again, that was cut in half. Before it was 8,000 characters. And a character is just a word or a space, or if you hit the enter key, that's what a character is. So OWEB is a 4-character limit, but with a space on both sides, that's 6 characters. So if that is helps provide an example. And we have a character limit counter on there. You start typing to help you kind of judge how many characters your response is. So I was going to mention that earlier, so I just thought I'd emphasize that right now. And so the next question is, will baseline data be collected as part of this project? If yes, please describe that proposed baseline data collection in the earlier section, in your goals and actions and sort of activities earlier in the application. If it's no, we want to know what baseline data will be used, if applicable. So I think that's pretty straightforward. If you don't think baseline data is needed, you can just tell us that there as well, and how you kind of determine that, why that does not apply, why you don't need baseline data, or that you're, again, if you're establishing that, make sure you really emphasize that earlier in the goals and action section, but some of those details can also be provided in the study design related to monitoring frequency. So please go back, if you're not sure, go back and make sure you have some reference to baseline monitoring in your action or activities section of the application. So these next 2 questions have not changed at all. We've kind of refined a little bit of the guidance, so I'll go over that. So, how does the project complement relevant existing data and current or planned monitoring efforts? And again, just a little bit inside of that is like, you have a monitoring question. Well, can you answer it with existing data or monitoring that someone else is already doing? Why do you need to collect this data? So really think of it in that way. So we want to know how this project will build on any existing data, including historical data and indigenous knowledge, okay? So indigenous knowledge is also known as traditional ecological knowledge. If you are incorporating indigenous knowledge into your project, please describe the context that you'll be using this information in developing or implementing your monitoring project. If you're not incorporating indigenous knowledge or TK, that's fine. It's just something that we incorporated into our rules, and so it's an opportunity for you to do that if if appropriate. But if you're building on current or planned monitoring efforts, explain why new monitoring data collection is necessary and how proposed monitoring will leverage current or planned monitoring efforts. If there are no existing data or planned or current monitoring efforts, describe how you determine that new data is needed. Okay, and so I think the key thing there is that the reviewers and OWEB wants to know, like, how are you plugged in to the other partners in your watershed doing similar or complementary monitoring? I really want to make sure that monitoring is not redundant. I mean, we hear about that all the time, that, you know, people are doing similar monitoring the same site and they just didn't know until they saw another, you know, temp logger in the stream or something. So really want to make sure you guys are doing that homework up front to make sure your project is needed. And if there's similar monitoring or other monitoring happening, that you're incorporating their information, or that maybe the information you're collecting will benefit the work that they're doing. And so that's an opportunity to describe that here. All right, and so the next question is, please describe how the appropriate technical experts and community members, including local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change, are engaged. So there's a lot going on here. I'll try to unpack it. There's actually multiple criteria. And so we're really asking for sort of two audiences in here. We were asking you, you know, how you're working with technical experts, provide a response to that, because that's typically a different group of people than how you are engaging community members, and including local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. As many of you guys know, last year we went through rulemaking to include climate criteria into all of our grant programs, all of our grant applications. So that's one of the places that we incorporated that. And so, you know, describe who may have a role in the proposed project, from planning the monitoring through using the resulting information to make decisions in the future. List the technical experts and community members you're working with or plan to work with, and why they are relevant to the proposed project, and describe their role in the proposed project. And so we provide some additional information on the communities disproportionately impacted by climate change here. So think about the following, you know, how will engagement with local communities impacted by climate change, such as Native American tribes, communities of color, rural communities, coastal communities, communities experiencing lower incomes, and other audiences traditionally underrepresented in public processes, including seniors, youth, and persons with disabilities, and how will that engagement help inform the project, or have them benefit from the information that emerges from this project? So just kind of wanted to emphasize that. So after information engagement, we have these two questions that remain under data. And so there's a lot here that I'll unpack as well. Let's see here. So this really did not change, you guys. So if you're familiar with our application, these didn't change, but I just want to kind of provide some tips here. So here we want for you to describe how the data is going to be managed, analyzed, and interpreted, and explain the steps and software tools used to manage and analyze the data to answer the monitoring questions posed in the application. Okay, so there are really two things here. You know, how will the data be managed? And basically that's important. The way I think about it is, what are you going to do with the data from the time you collect it in the field to the point of data analysis? Will you be collecting data on field data sheets in the field? And then when you return to the office, you'll enter the data and manage it in a spreadsheet on your laptop. You know, you can describe that here. Or are you using electronic tablets, entering data into an electronic field form, established using survey 123, and then when you get to the office, you're going to upload it to, you know, an Esri database, ArcGIS, you know, sort of spatial tabular database. or using just another type of database to manage the data before you begin to analyze the data. And so really think about that. That's what we want to know. And you might have multiple types of data that are managed different ways. And that's important to describe there, because if you're going to collect all this type of data, and you're only going to talk about managing or analyzing one kind of that data, that's going to raise concerns, because your application is not thorough. It's not describing what you're going to do with all this data. And so then the next thing is talking about the data analysis, right? And so really, it's important to link it back to your monitoring question that you stated earlier, monitoring questions you stated earlier. So if you have multiple questions, you can organize your data analysis description by monitoring question or group of related questions you're seeking to answer. And I find that is really helpful to help the reviewers understand what you're going to do, depending on how complicated or how complex your monitoring project that you're proposing. So again, remember, right now we're in this restoration effectiveness monitoring activity. So if you are have questions related to effectiveness of restoration, make sure your analysis describes how you're going to analyze the data to show the effects of the restoration actions and relate that back to your questions and study design. And then finally, we want to understand how you're going to interpret the data, right? So the question is, describe how the data will be managed, analyzed, and interpreted. That final place is interpretation is, it's just that broader context. After you analyze it, like, what did it tell you? And there's different ways you can interpret it, right? You can, share your analysis and results with the restoration community and the people who implemented those projects, and they might have additional interpretation that it's important to keep in mind when you're writing your final report. So any way that you want to talk about how you plan to interpret the data and analyses is important to include here. Also, if you're using specific software tools to analyze the data, it's important to include that here. If you have specific, this will be the place where if you're talking about how you're going to develop estimates and you have, specific formulas that apply, that are sort of standard formulas, you can include that here as well. We include the criteria here. So there's basically 2 different criteria that apply. And this is sort of that most important one. To what extent does the proposed project clearly address the monitoring question, and how the proposed monitoring methods and activities, including study design, data collection, management, and analysis procedures, will analyze or will answer these questions? So just underscore the criteria that will be applied and the importance of it. And then finally, that last question, or data, is describe how the data will be stored, reported, and made available to the public. All right, so there's a lot there too. There's basically 3 things, right? And so think about it like this: like after data analysis, and it's part of data management, but describe how over time you're going to store this data long-term to make it available to others, maybe people within your organization, but also others, and how that's going to be sustainable over time. Are you going to put it on the cloud? Are you going to share it with others? Do other organizations or agencies have a data clearinghouse that maybe it makes sense for you to upload? Keep in mind that we require water quality data to be submitted to DEQ. Well, DEQ is going to put your data, if you have all the QA/QC and metadata, they're going to put it in their OWEB database. And then that database is available for the state of Oregon. And they push that data using the exchange network to EPA's Water Quality Exchange network. And so that data will be made available nationally and the state level for water quality. And if you collect fish or wildlife data or habitat data, we require that you submit that data to ODF&W's NRIMP clearinghouse. And so that's another way in which you should be describing how you're going to store that data long-term and make it available to the public and natural resource professionals. So mentioning that here is helpful because it demonstrates that you're aware of those data reporting requirements, but also how you're going to make it available using existing clearinghouses and systems to make that data available. Also, that takes time, right? And so we want to make sure that you guys are incorporating, storing, and making data available to the public as part of your scope of work, but also the expenses in your budget so you don't run out of funding. And you have the resources to do that. All those activities are eligible expenses in a monitoring application, and we want to make sure that you're budgeting appropriately to accomplish those important things. Also, talk about how you're going to report the data, right? And so another reporting requirements that OWEB has is that we require a technical report be submitted along with the project completion report to close out your monitoring grant. And so if you're collecting multiple data sets over multiple years, like what's your plan for reporting that data? Are you going to develop annual reports, or are you going to just at the end of a, say 3-year period, you're going to write in year 4 a comprehensive report that includes all of your data and reports your findings? And then what are you going to do with that report, right? How are you going to share that with the audiences that you care about? Yeah, you have to submit it to OWEB to meet the data requirements in our grant agreement, but what are the audiences that you want to communicate with, and how are you going to do that? How are you going to report your findings? So, there's no single way that we prescribe. It's really for you to talk to us through, like, hey, this is the audience that we care about, and this is how we're going to report that data to them. We're going to put this report on our website. We're going to meet with the restoration practitioners and share with them the findings from this restoration in an annual meeting to talk about how they can incorporate these findings into an adaptive management framework to improve their actions over time. That's just an example. Or we're going to go to this annual conference, and we want to present these findings because we think they're exportable to other watersheds. Again, those are all eligible expenses and totally suitable, but that's your opportunity to talk about that, how you're going to report and make those findings available to the public, but also other relevant natural resource professionals. So hopefully I described that adequately. Might drink some water now and see what Greg wants to add to the this section of the application.
Thanks, Ken. Nothing to add. We do have a couple questions. First question is if OWEB has awarded a monitoring proposal, is it advisable to start collecting samples before DEQ approves a SAP?
Someone really wants to talk about SAPs. Yeah, so that's cool. It's again, is it advisable? It's like maybe not. Are you familiar with the sampling? Have you done it before? Do you know the methods that they require? Are you aware of all the QA/QC procedures that DEQ asks for you to take and then record and submit with your data? If you have a really firm understanding, and maybe DEQ's already looked at it and provided you some input, and you're just made some revisions to incorporate their comments, and you're just waiting for final signatures for them to say it's approved, then then maybe I'm a little more comfortable with you proceeding. But if you've never done this monitoring, it's super foreign to you, and DEQ has not provided any feedback on your SAP, and you haven't even started to write it, then I would say no, don't do that, right? So I think it just depends on where you are, your knowledge, skills, and abilities related to the monitoring, and how fluent you are with the QA/QC procedures related to the data you want to collect.
Great. Thanks, Ken. We have another question. What if you are gathering baseline data for one site, but already have baseline data for a different site? I don't see a necessary question associated with that.
If you want to provide a little more context, that might help. I'm not sure. I think really, is baseline data part of it? Do you have baseline data? If you're going to use it, what baseline data do you plan to use if you're not incorporating that to the project? It's just an opportunity to provide some context, because I think people always want to know, again, for like status and trend and effectiveness monitoring, it's like, what are you comparing it to? And usually people want to know sort of what those baseline conditions are that kind of can serve as a comparison to additional data that you propose to collect.
Okay. And I think I'm just going to respond to the other question in chat, because it's just about guidance. So
Okay.
I'm going to do that, and I think we're good to proceed.
Yeah, cool. And we're doing good, right? We got 15 minutes.
Mhm.
So like I said, this section is unique to effectiveness of a restoration project, and the same questions are here for landscape scale effectiveness monitoring. Okay, I just want to show that if you're doing status and trend, what the one difference is in that page. So again, if you're doing status and trend, you can click on the bookmark here, or you can go all the way to the bottom and click status and trend. And this methods and design section is the same. Again, if you have multiple questions and sort of layers of sampling designs and methods, you can include that by clicking the plus sign. And then what you'll just see is that in the information engagement, because it's status and trend, and you're not evaluating effects of restoration, we don't ask you to describe, what are the restoration actions that you will be monitoring. So really everything else is the same data as well. So just wanted to emphasize that. So I'm gonna go back. Just kind of keep on this vein of restoration project effectiveness monitoring. And then when you're done with data, you just go to wrap up, okay? And wrap up short, you guys. And this is the same for status and trend too. So I could have just kept it there. So this is sort of like the $1 million question. Greg talked about it in his slide. And we talked to folks about this when they hold pre-app consultations with us. Is, how will this monitoring project inform future planning, implementation, or adaptive management of restoration or acquisition projects, right? Like, how is this going to inform on the ground work? And we understand that sometimes the connection between monitoring actions, especially status and trend, and how it will affect future on the ground work is maybe a little farther out than, say, like a technical assistance project where you're designing and getting permits for a restoration project. But you need to be able to connect the dots on how, keyword there is how will this information be used. And so some of the things that I think about is, who is the person, organization, audience that you feel as the applicant is going to apply the data, right? Is it your organization? Okay, cool. Well, then you guys talk about that. How are you going to use that? Is it going to help you prioritize restoration? You're going to map these conditions, and then you're going to focus on that area because those areas are the most degraded, and you think that's the most important area to focus. And then you're going to start engaging with the private landowners in those areas, and you're going to start designing and scoping and implementing restoration actions to restore those degraded watershed conditions, right? That's one example. But if you're just the one collecting the data, then someone else is going to act on it. Are you expecting, say, Forest Service, say you're monitoring Forest Service lands? Well, then hopefully you have engaged with them, or you plan to engage with them, and then you're going to, after your results have been collected and you've done your analyses, you've written your report, you're going to meet with those folks and you're going to say, hey, look at this information. It looks like this area, say it's effectiveness monitoring. It's like these projects aren't meeting the objectives The results that we have that shows that these existing restoration projects need some adaptive management, and this is what we can do to help meet those, physical or ecological objectives. So really just connect the dots, explain what you're going to do with that information and how it can be used to implement future on the ground work. And again, if it's effectiveness monitoring, it can be to adaptively manage those current projects that you're monitoring, but also can give you additional information on how you might design, scope, and implement future restoration projects based on what you learned. Just click on the I button. Yeah, I really just want you to be specific and be succinct in articulating how that information can be used. And what used to be in the previous guidance that I'll just mention too is like, what are those tangible next steps? Describe those. What are you going to do? And one of the things that in these pre-app consultations, we often encourage the use of letters of support. Letters of support uploaded to applications are not required, but they can demonstrate from your partners how they are interested in data, why they're interested in the data, and how they will use it. If they can hit those in their letters of support, that demonstrates that this information will inform future on the ground work. And so you can say it, but then another organization says it, puts their letterhead on it and signs it. That's impactful, and review team members pay attention to that. So I think that's the final thing I'll say. This last one, straightforward. Will this project benefit salmon or steelhead? Yes or no? If it's yes, keep in mind at time of grant agreement, if you get funded, we'll be asking you to fill out some additional metrics for our reporting to NOAA fisheries. So with that, I'll pause, see if Greg has anything to add.
Don't think I have anything to add. This is the salmon and steelhead question is just one that we were able to reduce a lot of content because we don't need all those questions up front at time of application. We do have another question in the chat, Ken, about the DEQ approval of SAP and how the question is, does OWEB expect description of how data is handled on the front end before DEQ submission, or is description of how data is handled on the back end after DEQ submittal adequate? Your thought for that one?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So are you referring to the application? I think we have adequate guidance on what we're asking you to put in there. The SAP template that DEQ has is pretty straightforward. I don't know if you want to read the question. I kind of got lost there a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it says for applicants that report water quality data to DEQ in accordance with the DEQ approved SAP, does OWEB expect description of how data is handled on the front end before DEQ submission, or is a description of how data is handled on the back end after DEQ submittal adequate?
Got it. Yeah. No, just what you're going to do with it. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. So not the back end. I mean, you could say, yeah, DEQ will review it, and that does provide a service to you guys, because if they come back and they're grading your data as A data or high quality data, like that says a lot about your work, and that you're doing your QA/QC procedures and you're providing the adequate metadata. And so I think that's important. We get copied. So just to be aware, all of our water quality grantees that submit data to DEQ, we receive copies from them on their findings. After they reviewed your data, what you submitted, we get the same confirmation you get. So if it's all the stuff is adequate, they talk about that in there, and the grades and the thoroughness, and if your project is lacking metadata and they can't incorporate the information into their database, we'll know that too. And so I think it's great feedback for you, but also for the funder on this. And so what we want you to include mainly in this application is talking about how you're going to manage and submit and report the data on the front end, what your kind of responsible for and less on what DEQ is going to do with it after they get it. But if you want to talk a little bit about what they do with it and how they make it available on the Aquums, and that they push, WQX, making the data available to a broader audience, I think that's great. And also that, they review your data and they're going to grade your data, and that you see value in that as well. And that's feedback that's important to our grantees to adaptively manage and improve their water quality monitoring programs over time.
Great. Thanks, Ken. No more questions.
Cool. Well, thanks. Yeah. We got 6 minutes left, so I feel like we covered a lot. And, again, Greg and I and Liz, next week, we're going to do open office hours. I forget exactly what time, but I know it's March 14th. Do you guys remember what time we're doing that for monitoring?
Yeah, Ken, actually, I'm going to hijack the screen. Sounds
Okay.
like we're done with the application, correct?
Yeah, stop sharing.
Okay. So I just have a couple slides that we're going to go through. And this first one we've been showing at the other webinars, and we've been showing this at our review team meetings. And it's just kind of a reminder that our applications that are approved by our board become scopes of work attached to the grant agreement. And so when you're writing the application, consider are all the elements included really clear? Who's going to do it, what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and how much does it cost. If there is any uncertainty on these specific elements in your application, the reviewer is going to get an image like this. I kind of know what's happening, but it's still a little fuzzy to me on this part or that part. So if a reviewer is able to clearly understand all these different components that we feel complete a full scope of work, you're kind of going to get that image at the bottom of the screen. It's going to be really clear what you did, why you did it, how much it costs, etc. So just a reminder, clarity is something that we're always striving for. And so the more clear, direct, succinct, and specific you can be, the better for the folks that are reviewing and evaluating your applications. And so just the last slide here, Ken did talk about office hours. So just as kind of a follow-up to these webinars, we are sitting around on Zoom for an hour to help answer any of your questions or any clarification you might have had after reviewing the webinar today. So feel free to jump on next week on the 13th from 1 to 2 p.m. and OWEB staff will be there to answer your questions and help you out any way we can. So we are just about at that time.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of questions from folks around this app. If you want to talk more about that, happy to do that during those office hours, or just give me a call or give me an email. We can also cover that in a pre-app consultation. So please, I know it's a big deal. And so we're happy to talk more about it in detail and even pull in DEQ into the conversation if needed. Happy to help coordinate that.
Super. Well, thanks, Ken, and thanks, Liz. I think we are wrapped up for this webinar. I appreciate everybody's hanging out with us today and learning more, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week. And we're going to stop recording, and it's that time, so I hope you all have a good rest of your day.